My guest tonight is Mark Hackard. Mark is an independent foreign policy analyst. He earned a BA in Russian language from Georgetown University and an MA in Russian, Eastern European, and Eurasian Studies from Stanford University. He studies the intersection of political culture, religion, strategic issues, which he approaches from a traditional conservative position. Soul the East is Mark's online project to ensure the valuable aspects of Russian political and religious thought are made available to English speakers. Mark, how are you doing tonight?
Good. How are you, Tim?
Very good, thanks. I want to thank you for coming on the show again.
Oh, of course.
And of course, tonight I ran across a couple of articles. I think you translated them. Is that how it goes? Is that you these articles?
Yeah.
Okay.
I translated them from my project, espionagehistoryarchive.com.
Okay, so the two articles, I think they blend together quite nicely. They cover the topic. More or less, I wanted the infiltration use of religion and perhaps other non-government organizations by intelligence agencies, particularly the Western intelligence agencies. That tends to be their MO in this.
Right.
And one article was Scientology and the CIA. And well, the other one is Malta, Masonry, and the CIA. So let's start off with the Scientology and the CIA. Scientology, what is its ties to the intelligence agencies, and how has it been used in the past?
Well, we do know from various sources that Scientology has indeed cooperated with the Central Intelligence Agency in gathering intelligence. If you look at Scientology's sort of modus operandi and what they do, just as far as the auditing sessions and other methods of gathering information, they're all about collecting intelligence. So Scientology then would be a great, because they're an international organization, they pose as a religion, they are a great asset for an intelligence service like the CIA, who naturally want to collect as much valuable intelligence as possible on as many high-value potential targets as possible. Intelligence targets being individuals or organizations, businesses, their assets, all that stuff matters. So Scientology can be useful in that regard. And the article that I translated, Scientology and the CIA, is it was originally a lecture by a researcher whose name is Alexander Dvorkin, who's a Russian researcher at an Orthodox university in Russia, St. Tikhon's. And he makes a good case for Scientology being sort of a operational asset of the CIA worldwide. Meaning that there is some kind of intelligence sharing relationship going on with the CIA, and we really have to rely on a lot of circumstantial evidence in this, but it's there, and there's even documentary evidence of CIA assistance to the Church of Scientology mentioned in the Church of Scientology's own their own documents. So that shows that there's more to meets the eye than just what we might think of Tom Cruise and John Travolta and their various adventures. Yeah.
Of course, its founder, L. Ron Hubbard, he came out of Office of Naval Intelligence, correct?
Yes, L. Ron Hubbard did come out of naval intelligence, and it is unclear what he exactly did in the war. Supposedly, as Dvorkin points out, Hubbard was just a minor clerk and was mostly working on censoring correspondence. So he was of naval personnel during the war. So he was, and by that claim, he was a desk jockey. But of course, the Church of Scientology loves to play it up and say that he was a super secret agent man who helped save countless lives in Bhutan and elsewhere doing daring missions. But it's not very clear what exactly Hubbard was up to. We do know, aside from his intelligence career, that he was very much into the occult, and that he was a member of the OTO in Pasadena, California during the 1940s. The lodge there, run by Jack Parsons, who functioned basically as Aleister Crowley's deputy for the West Coast of the United States. And the Scientologists sort of work that into Hubbard's legend that, oh, he was sent there by naval intelligence to break up a black magic ring. That seems pretty implausible to me. I think Hubbard went and was practicing magic because that's what he was into. Some really weird stuff. So there's a definite tie to intelligence and also occultism with Scientology.
And Jack Parsons, he was the head of Jet Propulsion Laboratories?
Yes, JPL, they also call it Jack Parsons Labs. But yeah, who of course has a crater on the dark side of the moon named after him. No one seems to get upset about that the founder of JPL was a Satanist black magician. But yeah.
Yeah, it kind of gets in that weird NASA connection and all that period. But this is also talking about the foundation of Scientology. Its start in the 50s, and this is just, of course, during the MK Ultra experiments of the CIA, and we know that now that involved a lot of weird stuff, including experimentation and
yes,
but also the use of cults, right? So
right. Cults did play a key role in what we know from MK Ultra. The documents are limited, but there is at the very least tangential evidence that cults were studied in different religious rituals of various cultures, and religious and occult rituals, for that matter, were very, very deeply assessed for their potential use in mind control. With the strange thing with Scientology and MK Ultra was L. Ron Hubbard actually talked about CIA mind control experiments or CIA abuse of psychiatry, or of course the Scientologists would say that psychiatry alone is abuse in itself. But he actually was saying things publicly in the 60s, I believe. I don't know. I'm not quite sure if it was as early as the 50s, but he was speaking out on CIA use of psychiatry and mind control experiments. But of course, Scientologists were doing the exact same types of things. So it's not exactly it's not really clear cut what Scientology's role in that was at the time, but it's thought that from the 1960s onward, at least according to Miles Copeland, who in one of his works, Miles Copeland was a former CIA officer, and in one of his works he said that there was an agreement between the CIA and some sort of intelligence sharing arrangement between CIA and Scientology from the 1960s onward. In 1993, you have a big breakthrough when the IRS finally granted the Scientologists tax-exempt status as a religion. So from that point onward, Scientology's interests were actually lobbied overseas openly by the State Department. And there are even cases of Scientologists having a private audience in Germany, for example, with Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. But what's interesting now is that there actually has just been a Supreme Court case. It was a week or two ago, where the Church of Scientology's tax exempt status has actually been revoked. So it's where that leaves uh, the intelligence sharing uh, arrangement between CIA and Scientology and other U.S. government agencies. Who knows? That's all in the dark still.
You could consider Scientology one of these private intelligence networks.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
Yes, they have their own Office of Security. I'm trying to remember the exact acronym they use for. They have so many strange names for everything, but yes, they've had their own private intelligence group that performs basically counterintelligence and intelligence functions, that has broken into government offices over decades, stolen documents, um, gathered blackmail material on people, harassed uh, people who defected from Scientology and no longer wanted to be part of it or spoke out against it, made those people's lives miserable. So yeah, that's all well known.
Hmm. And their ability to act that way might suggest that they have some sort of, I guess, protection at high levels, so they can get away with this stuff without being prosecuted or being bothered by law enforcement officials. Or
It would seem that
yeah,
way at certain points. I think it's interesting. Of all the cults, Scientology is definitely, while it does hold some power and influence and money in places like Hollywood, uh, and around the country to some extent, and they certainly put out that image. I mean, it's you can see it's okay to be, um, it in say in the media, it's okay to be anti-Scientology and to comment on how crazy it is and just the weirdness, and you can get away with that, and that's fine, and that's politically correct. But um, but yeah, I think probably the Scientologists probably do have some levers of power that they can wield. I don't know to what extent exactly. Um, but they do seem to get away with some really nasty stuff,
hmm,
and it leaves you to wonder what sort of high level connections they might have. Now, if it that's just inside the United States. If you go abroad, then they probably have a lot more freedom. Well, it depends on the climate they're operating in the given country. But as far as sanction from the U.S. government goes, which of course would be unspoken and covert, but it seems like if they do have some sort of agreement or arrangement set up with the CIA, say that they could do all sorts of nefarious things, and and uh, and no one would be the wiser, except unless a counterintelligence service in the local country um, is on their tail and not going to let them get away with it. For example, in Russia, which of course I follow um, closely, the Russians last year raided the Scientology organization in Moscow and confiscated a bunch of documents and said that Scientologists were collecting sensitive information on people, and not just the members of their cult, but also people in the government, in law enforcement, in the security services, and so on. So that certainly sounds like information that Langley would be interested in, no doubt.
and so it'd be legitimate for that government to not see Scientology as a religion, but more or less as a foreign intelligence agency operating on on their soil, uh, uh,
Sure,
which would seem to justify a crackdown or some
sure,
sort of
sure.
regulation.
Yeah,
But
yeah. That's and again, it's always done under the guise of, oh, freedom of religion, pluralism, and uh, freedom of conscience, and all these nice slogans that ultimately are just vehicles of subversion. Is what it's ultimately about. That's all. Those are just meant to open the door for all these really nasty forces that can tear apart a society and a culture and degrade it, and that's the goal.
So it has a sort of that's a sort of a Freemasonic approach.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
that's where it derives, and so that really is the history of it. Is that Freemasonry has always advocated the so-called the entire separation of church and state, secularism, and so on. And because when you have that very clear division of those two domains, then religion is relegated to the side, and new forms of religion can come in and take over. New whether those be cults or other whatever the people in charge of the state want to set up or promote. So that's a classic strategy of divide and conquer, and it's known as pluralism. The Western concept of pluralism leads ultimately to a society where Scientologists thrive,
Mm-hmm.
and other cults or other or the mega church enterprises that rake in billions and are all about the prosperity gospel, or this really fake plastic so-called spirituality or whatever. Yeah.
And of course, they can be vehicles for money laundering and
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And there was the case. I mean, there's lots of cases of these preachers involved with all sorts of illegal activities if they're not compromised sexually or financially. But yeah, money laundering is a very useful useful method of operation within religious cover. So if there's an intelligence service using religious organizations or a missionary organization overseas, it's a great way to move money, and there have been mega churches who have been indicted for money laundering, or preachers of mega churches, these that they've gone to jail for this crime. So it's not and again, sometimes it's not exactly clear who else might be involved. It'll stop at them, and it won't go any further, even though they might have a large overseas presence and all these branches that are in different countries of their church, or it gets tied into intelligence a lot of the time. It's very sort of the dark side of what you would not normally look at as something tied to spying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, L. Ron Hubbard, he identified as a Rosicrucian.
He did study Rosicrucianism, and I believe, yes, he was part of the Rosicrucian order. And some people think he was sent to do that by the OTO, which of course is the Ordo Templi Orientis, Aleister Crowley's organization. So, and the OTO itself was spawned originally from a spy, or it was a Prussian police agent named Karl. Oh no, I think it was Theodore Royce. There were Karl Kellner and Theodore Royce, and I believe Royce was the police agent. So, and who was interested in sex magic and whatever else. And later on, Crowley would take it over, and Crowley was an agent of British intelligence.
Yes,
So,
who spent time here in the United States. For a good
oh yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I just found out that he had a house up the river from Woodstock.
That's interesting. Yeah, he of course did his Montauk working, and there's lots of weird stuff associated with Montauk, New York.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where he supposedly met his holy guardian angel, and he sketched it out, and it looks like an alien. And really, and this was, I think, around the year 1904. It looks, or maybe it was a little bit later, but it looks like an alien, like a gray alien, although its eyes are smaller. And so it's very strange how that ties into the UFO, that would eventually tie into the UFO mythology. Um, so again, you have those threads of
Yeah.
intelligence, various esoteric phenomena, and the occult, and all sorts of other modern myths. Yeah.
Oh, that gets a little like the story of the nine.
Yes, the
And
not
who
right,
it's
and
yeah,
yeah, Andrei Puharich
yeah.
at the where is it, a farmhouse in
These elite
rural New York? Yeah,
elite,
nine elite families.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
there's just
so
a lot of creepy stuff that
yeah.
goes on.
Or
Yeah,
that yeah, get Jack Parsons and all that. Yeah, like we mentioned earlier and all that stuff. So
yeah.
and of course didn't he die in a fire explosion or something in his house? And
Yeah, he did. He died, I guess, in an explosion in his garage, and he was, and that's kind of a mysterious death, whether he was killed or not. He was doing, he was passing secrets, technological secrets, on to Israel's Mossad, for one thing. So
that's interesting.
yeah. So that was, another extracurricular activity of his. Yeah.
So that's so, but so we have the manipulation or the use of Scientology. Now, again, there's some question whether does Scientology use the CIA or does the CIA use Scientology?
Right.
You have a
I
part in your article, you bring that up.
Yeah, right. And Miles Copeland cites a case where they sent an officer, I believe, to infiltrate the Church of Scientology, and the officer ended up getting really into it and decided, that this is great, and so he would ask for money for operational expenses and then spend it on auditing and going up the levels, so he could become a, what do they call it, an operating thetan. And yeah, I think it goes to level 8. So spending CIA, spending tax dollars, uh, getting clear, and he basically went native with the Scientologists, and so Dvorkin kind of asked the question, yeah, so who is using whom here? That's a legitimate question. I think ultimately that the CIA has a lot more power than the Scientologists, and that that they are using the Church of Scientology to their ends. Now, that doesn't, what we know about the CIA. If you look into the background of the CIA, you'll see that Skull and Bones is involved, and Freemasonry, of course, and all this other strange stuff. So who really runs the CIA? That's also kind of an open question. If you get into some of the activities that have been uh, really exposed in various scandals, like the Franklin cover-up, um, then you'll notice that William Casey, for example, was involved, was a Wall Street lawyer, and had a he had a weird, he had, according to Henry Vincent, the DC Madam, who wrote a
Mhm.
book with Nick Bryant. William Casey, CIA director, was one of his clients, and was wanted boys for sexual favors. So, and wanted Vincent, who ran the escort service, to supply, or at least, at the very least, the CIA assets who were running the ring wanted Vincent to supply these high level clients like Casey with
Mhm.
underage boys, and which is just, and the pedophile stuff ties into cults as well. If you can look at the Finders, another religious cult that was run, by all accounts, it had a connection to CIA, and that is actually documented in U.S. Customs agents' documents that they wrote back in the 80s, when this around the same time as events like the Franklin cover-up. So
Yeah, the investigation was officially shut down for reasons of national security.
right,
Yeah,
right.
that's I think Ted Gunderson is going to talk
Yeah,
about that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And Gunderson's a weird. Gunderson's
That's
a
an well, you
yeah.
get it.
Gunderson's kind of a dubious figure,
Yeah,
and
well,
yeah, I mean,
it's a murky world. I mean,
yeah, it's a very murky.
Hall of Mirrors.
Yeah, you bet.
So it's hard to say what his motivations are. I don't know him, and there are people who are I guess have look at him very suspiciously
Yeah,
because but he might have had again he might have had some good intentions, but he himself was involved in Intel Pro.
right.
So
You just don't know. Yeah,
don't know.
and yeah, you can leave that to God to judge. But
Mhm.
yeah.
And of course you have the False Memories Foundation, which was founded
Right.
by a bunch of spooks.
Right, bunch of people connected to intelligence, and also people connected to things like NAMBLA and advocating for the legalization of pedophilia, and so right, that stuff just can't be trusted. Yeah.
And another thing is the use of human trafficking, pedophilia, sex slaves. These things are part of a blackmail.
Yes, that all ties into, unfortunately, that all ties into intelligence operations, and it's used for compromising targets. Mm-hmm. So you can even refer to the accounts of Jim Rothstein, the NYPD detective, who came across such phenomena back in New York in the 1960s.
Yeah, that's linking the Son of Sam case. This is much wider conspiracy involving snuff films, intelligence, elite people. I mean, this dates back to like 1969.
Yeah.
And also the famed Stonewall riots, where we're supposed to believe that this was the coming out of gay rights and they're being respected and having their rights, but according to Jim Rothstein, that place was a locus for human trafficking, pedophilia, child prostitution, pornography. But
and those things just don't get publicized for whatever reasons. And I think when you figure out that sometimes high level figures have the power to shut down media inquiry, and in some cases even senior members of the media themselves get involved. So they have all the motivations in the world to keep a lid on those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was listening to an interview by him a few days ago, and he apparently got involved in that because he was in New York, but he was originally from Minnesota.
Yeah,
and a lot of the young kids showing up there, they were being
we're being trafficked from the Midwest.
From the Midwest, yeah. So, but there's despite all this talk about Stonewall being the birth of gay rights and celebrated, there's a real ugly side to that. It's not just about equal rights and being able to be to be respected. There's a real ugly side to that, and it doesn't.
It's very sad. These, you have to feel bad for a lot of these people who, I don't know what the most. I try to find a charitable way to say that. Everyone has different disorders or disordered passions. We're all subject to that, but a lot of people have been abused or mistreated in various ways, and then. And they're searching for meaning, and they end up in some really awful situations, and it seems like 1960s New York and 1970s New York was certainly a focal point for that.
Yeah. But we have cities that are like this. LA is kind of like that too.
Oh, you bet. Yeah.
And,
the Boulevard of Broken Dreams. Yeah.
Just sort of like there's a pall that hangs over the city.
Yeah, just sort of chews people up and spits them out.
Yeah,
just a machine for sucking away souls. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The now getting back to Scientology, and of course Scientology. You mentioned auditing and intelligence, and they have a very sophisticated, well-developed intelligence network, and the auditing program. And you mentioned how that can be used against foreign officials and dignitaries and celebrities and all that to get them to do.
Certainly.
Yeah, and I guess
Yeah.
that's one other way that even the CIA can get this information and utilize it and keep the Scientology at an arm's length. Like the same way they use cults for drug dealing and human trafficking.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's a big element of plausible deniability there, because it sounds really crazy on the face of it. Oh, the CIA was using this weirdo cult to say to run drugs or to run a underage prostitution operation that was compromising high-level government officials. I mean, it just sounds like something out of a B movie. But no, it actually goes on, and history has shown that this stuff happens. So it's
well, the problem is a lot of people think when you mention this, you're talking about CIA proper, and they'll think about the people they know who may work there.
Right. I know. If you, I went to school in D.C., so you have plenty of friends. Lots of people have friends who work there and who are good, patriotic people and analysts, and they do. I certainly had professors who were in CIA, and they're good people overall. And but there are other sides there, and again, that's the matter of compartmentalization. Not everyone knows the entire big picture. So there are lots of other corners and rabbit holes that most people just don't know even exist.
And one thing you mentioned when you were earlier, we were talking about their interest, Scientology's interest in, CIA's interest, maybe in other cultures, and anthropology played a big part in the formation of the CIA. You have one Gregory Bateson, and of course I think his spouse was Margaret Mead, and and both of them were interested in anthropology, and both of them were engaged in, I guess you could call it weaponized anthropology.
You bet. Yeah. When Mead wrote the work on Samoa, right? That was
about free love. Yeah.
Yeah, about free love. That was just proven to be a crock of BS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, maybe the target there was the American people, because that was
exactly. The target wasn't the Samoans. It was Americans. Right.
But
just like Kinsey.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And Bateson, because you mentioned that one of the tricks, I think it was Miles Copeland.
Yes,
was getting to know a culture's religion, culture, or their superstitions, fears, and then using that against them.
Yeah.
And one example was knowing that if they're a certain political leader or a dignitary or official has certain beliefs in the occult, and you can use that against them. I think it was the scheme was called the Occultism in High Places.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and Copeland talked about that, how his colleague was running this program, Occultism in High Places. What they did was they basically made contact. They established relationships with various occultists, astrologers, fortune tellers around the world who had entree to the local political elites, whatever continent, whatever region that might be, in order to influence these various leaders. You can think how that's a great way to exert influence and power through beliefs that people hold very strongly. So his famous example that he gives is Kwame Nkrumah, the leader of Ghana, was actually overthrown in a coup when he was convinced by his fortune teller or his astrologer to go take a trip to China. I'm sure the CIA told him, all right, tell him that he's going to meet with great success in China or something like that. So he went to China, and then by the time he came back, he was no longer the leader of his country. So that's just a a great example of how those how cults and how occult groups can be used in statecraft, and it just goes back a long time. Sir Francis Walsingham, who was considered the founder of MI5, basically British counterintelligence, uh, used supposedly is said to have used witches for intelligence gathering, and even it's said that that they conjured up a storm to sink the Spanish Armada in 1588. So this stuff just goes, and of course you have the case of John Dee, but it goes back a very long way, or just even even with religious cover. I mean, the Vatican has operated the world's longest running spy agency, essentially, through their diplomacy. So,
And oh, no, well, what do we make of Reagan's supposed interest in astrology?
right,
Remember that?
right. Reagan had a deep and abiding interest in astrology, and he was also an enthusiastic reader of Manly Palmer Hall, who was a very high level occultist in the United States. Um, so yes, what do we make of that?
Yeah.
It certainly informed Reagan's worldview, and he even talked about it. He even gave examples of he recounted this one myth of the American founding where this guy in a black robe comes and gives some kind of prophetic proclamation to the founding fathers, and then disappears, and that was that was at a pivotal moment in the American Revolution, and that came straight from Manly Palmer Hall.
Hmm.
So
So, but now, again, what we're talking about here is whether the use of Scientology. Again, you can have, if there's a crackdown on Scientology in Russia, and their offices are stormed, and maybe they're expelled from the country, and in the West it can be played as Russia being authoritarian, and not respecting religious freedom. The same thing goes with other groups as well, feminist, gay rights organization, things like that. But the history of manipulating religion, I mean, you have early 1900s, you had the Yale Divinity School in China, working with the Union Theological Seminary, I think.
that sounds about right.
Yeah. And of course, the Yale Divinity School was, they had, missionary work, and they had hospitals, they did all the charity stuff. But at the same time, they were linked to the Anglo-American establishment. They were interested in weakening Sun Yat-sen, who was a Chinese nationalist, and they were leaving China vulnerable to further exploitation by Anglo-American financial interest.
Yeah, surprise. Yeah.
So that's an old model there. When the CIA itself started, from the get-go, it started manipulating religion. I think the church committee hearings talked about this in the 70s. I think it said, one of the reports said, the CIA paid salaries, bonuses, and expenses to the religious personnel or helped or to fund projects run by them. Most of the individuals were used for covert action purposes. Several were involved in large covert action projects in the mid-60s, which were directed at competing with communism in the Third World.
Yes, that's right, and that was at the same time as the rise, of course, of liberation theology, which American conservatives or neocons would pin on the KGB, but I think matters are a lot more complex than that.
It wasn't this that the Catholics the Catholics down there, particularly in Latin America, weren't very fond of the CIA and United Fruit, and they had seen firsthand what was going on in Guatemala, and so they weren't good recruits. So the Protestant, the evangelicals were good recruits. One thing they really liked the money, and they could recruit it. They could be called into the anti-communist crusade.
Oh yeah. At the same time, I do believe that liberation theology was actually funded through the big foundations, through Ford Foundation, Rockefeller. I'm not quite sure which,
But
but
it's part of the dialectic, you think?
yes,
Yeah.
I do think that's part of a dialectic.
Well,
Right.
Marxism, Marx, right?
And you can look at Marxism from the beginning.
Yeah.
That was the purpose. If you
Marx had
look,
angles.
right, right, and who funded the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, and how that was brought about, which we have discussed before, I think, in our previous.
Yeah, the Wall Street
Yeah.
to weaken Russia because
Right.
Russia was outside the Anglo-American sphere. It was still a Christian nation, which probably attracted the interest of some of the Jewish financial interest in England and in Wall Street. So
Yeah, yeah, and it was a right. It was a Christian monarchy, and it was not under the power of the what I like to call the Bankster International.
yeah, yeah. But again, we have this example of constant utilization of religion. We have this organization, the Summer Institute of Linguistics,
Hmm.
that was utilized. They worked with the Wycliffe Bible translators.
Oh, well, that's curious.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that
of
sounds about right.
course,
Now,
that SIL, Summer Institute of Linguistics, surprisingly, is also was accused of drug trafficking, human trafficking, smuggling emeralds, uranium, and waging germ warfare.
oh,
It's been
surprise. Now, where was Sumner Institute of Linguistics?
it's
Where was
primarily
that?
active in Latin America.
Okay,
Yeah,
yep,
but getting
that's
outside religion of the cultural, the NGO cultural agenda, and I mean, in the 50s and 60s, U.S. establishment, the CIA was very keen in pushing religious and Western values on traditional cultures, feminism, and now, of course, gay rights is now being promoted. But
right, right. That's just a step in the same
yeah,
direction.
but it's a way to disrupt. This goes back to the Freemasonic model, right? You disrupt these cultures, and
Yeah, it's a strategy of chaos.
yeah,
And
with under the banner of freedom.
right, right. It's always and like Dostoevsky, his theorist of revolution, Shigalov, said, in order to achieve or in order to have, I start out with perfect freedom. That's my goal, and then it ends. But in order to achieve that, I need to have total despotism.
Hmm.
Complete enslavement, total control. So that's the dialectic. That's how it works.
And even Marx talked about imposing this horrible regime, but the end would be what the withering away of
Right,
the
the state
state.
would just wither away, and right, and not coincidentally, I think it it exactly coincides with the dream of libertarians. It's the final state, the end goal of both communists and libertarians is that stateless uh, paradise type environment where every man can uh, how did Marx phrase it, that he'll go fishing in the morning and he'll build a house or whatever in the
Yeah.
afternoon, whatever.
Now,
Yeah.
libertarians might grimace at that, but we're talking about dialectics here, um, and they can be very tricky. You can be led to something. Uh, you can be led to some horrible destination, believing you're doing something quite different.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Right, and that all comes from the logic of the ideals themselves, and
mhm.
where they take you. It's a very treacherous road.
And you can destroy if you destroy tradition, local communities, you destroy say the corporate bodies that individuals rely upon, because in the meantime, uh, everyone becomes atomized, and we're seeing that in American culture today with the
Yeah.
creation of suburbia and
Oh, of
materialism.
course. Sure.
And it might have liberated us from the urban enclaves that we lived in, but where did it leave us, right?
Right. It left us alone, and
To be
right.
manipulated.
Yeah. That of course is certainly the goal, and and really again that's the goal of individualism, is modern individualism. This notion that the individual is completely liberated from any restraints. It ultimately leaves the individual face to face with the corporate state
Yeah,
and
that's the problem.
power
Yeah, yeah.
for it. Right.
We're
And
naked before that state with
you bet.
nothing to
And
fall
that,
back on.
yeah.
We don't have family. We don't have community. We don't have churches.
No, you don't have any intermediating institutions to protect you from say the willful or just arbitrary use of power by other entities.
Hmm.
It, and the state has its place certainly, but this is a total perversion of state power.
Oh, one
It,
thing is the destruction of
oh,
morality, because really, you think about morality, the morality is the great leveler. It's what the weak depend upon. If you don't have morality, then they're completely subject to the rich and powerful, and which we're
right,
seeing more and more today.
right,
You know.
and that just ties right back into social Darwinism and uh, the entire do what thou wilt philosophy of the elites. Yeah.
Now the again, getting back to this, the exploitation of religion. A couple of kind of weird examples that I got to bring up. One thing is the connections of, if you talk about the cults and religious groups being utilized by intelligences, is the connections linking the Jim Jones and the People's Temple to the CIA, which is very
Yes.
interesting.
Yes, it is very interesting. There was even a I think it was an A&E documentary done on it by Mike. What was his last name? It's escaping me at the moment. He's a famous television journalist. Mike. Oh, well, anyway,
What is that?
sorry.
60 Minutes? Yeah.
Yeah, was it
Mike
Mike?
Wallace.
Yeah, Mike Wallace.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Thank you. Mike Wallace had a documentary, and you can still find snippets of it on YouTube if you want to look at it. Had this documentary that laid out several CIA connections
Hmm.
to Jonestown, starting with Jim Jones going down to Brazil and being there at the same time as a man named, or in the same place. He went down to Belo Horizonte, along with a man named Dan Mitrione,
He's
who,
he's quite a character. Yeah.
yeah, who knew, and Dan Mitrione was a CIA officer who taught counterinsurgency, which can mean all sorts of nasty stuff, but taught counterinsurgency in Latin America during the 60s and would ultimately die. I think he was assassinated in Paraguay. But Mitrione was a CIA officer and had known Jones from Jones's childhood when Mitrione was a cop in Indiana. Jones was essentially his informant even back then. So I think that relationship continued all the way into Jones' adulthood, and so Jones's entire church may have been an intelligence project from almost from the get-go. We don't, but there was just a lot of evidence of the amount of psychotropics present at Jonestown was incredible, and that it was a first-rate medical facility that just had nothing, that didn't compare at all to the sheds and the other buildings, which was hard living to say the least. But all of a sudden they have this first-class medical facility with all these top of the line mind control drugs. It's like, where do you get those? And also I believe that I think his name was Dwyer. Was it Bud Dwyer? There was another CIA official
Jim
who
Dwyer.
was, yeah, was it? I can't. I might have been Bud Dwyer.
Mhm.
But I might be mistaken. But there was another CIA official present right before the suicide, and Jones was saying, Jones can be heard saying on the radio to get Dwyer away, and the Earth say, send Dwyer away, that Dwyer needed to be um, uh, kept out of whatever was about to happen. So there's a lot of details um, with the People's Temple that point to intelligence connections, plus the fact that Jones was a power player in San Francisco and local politics. And shortly after the mass suicide in Guyana, uh, two high-level local politicians in San Francisco happened to be assassinated, Harvey Milk and Mayor Moscone. So
That's right.
supposedly by a crazy guy who used the Twinkie defense, but it's just very, very suspicious.
He was a police officer with
Yeah, former police
yeah.
officer, and um, I can't remember what his sentence was, but it seems like he got off.
He got off real easy. He committed
Yeah,
suicide like 7 years later,
yeah,
supposedly.
it's
So,
very, yeah, very, very sad.
but yeah, Moscone had Jones could get out the vote, and he was rewarded with I think having a lot of his people take over. There was the housing uh,
Yeah, the Housing Commission. Yeah,
commission and a lot of welfare agencies. So
yep,
it seemed like there was some sort of cleanup operation going on right after
yeah,
Jonestown.
yeah,
These guys are taken out.
yeah. The
Yeah.
same sorts of things happened right after the Kennedy assassination.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, lots of people tied to JFK or who might have known something about the plot just happened to die mysteriously or uh, in one way or another. So,
And some have tied Jonestown to this outfit called World Vision, which, of course, World Vision was the missionary organization that Mark David Chapman worked for,
that's right.
and also had ties to Hinckley, because John Hinckley, the would-be assassin of Ronald Reagan, his father was a board member of World Vision and a business
Right.
partner.
Also, the head of Vanderbilt Energy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
he
a
was,
big Bush business partner or funder.
and the of course, the was although it was reported once or twice when it happened, Bush's son Neil was scheduled to have dinner with Hinckley's brother the day or the day after the assassination attempt.
That's right.
So, you know,
Yeah, just like the just like Bush Senior was meeting with Bin Laden's brother
yeah,
on 9/11. Yeah, you can't make it up.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, there's just business. What can you do?
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
Nothing
So,
personal.
and another example of religious infiltration, I think we can't get away without mentioning, would be Roberto Calvi, P2 Lodge, and the Vatican Bank in Operation Gladio in the 70s and 80s.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and
Yeah, that really ties in the threads of both major religions, occult groups, secret societies, intelligence agencies, and organized crime.
and then what
Yeah.
happened was the Vatican Bank was being used as a conduit or money law operation for Roberto Calvi, who was working for a guy. Was it Lucia Gelli?
Yeah,
Yeah.
was he working directly for Lucio Gelli? Because or Jelly was I think his name Jelly. Jelly was of course the head of P2 Lodge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he had something over Calvi, and apparently it's like a billions of dollars, 1.8 billion went missing or something. It had something to do with drug money, and of course, when you're talking about mafia, drug money, you're talking intelligence, and the Vatican Bank was being used to funnel this stuff, and of course, I think it was Bishop Marcinkus
Yes.
who apparently owned like resorts in Bahamas or something. And,
Right. Paul Marcinkus,
yeah,
former football player. Yeah.
yeah, he came out of Chicago, right? Like the
Yeah, and he was a bodyguard to I think it was Pope John Paul II. Yeah.
so, but yeah, so you have that, and a lot of there's some evidence that that was kind of allowed because he helped Solidarity with some of that money
Yeah, that's well that
in Poland.
would only make sense given that Solidarity was indeed the recipient of massive funds from the West, specifically from the CIA, for covert action purposes in the realm of political operations.
And this
Right.
is another example of I think of the Vatican because of the Cold War being fear of communism being able to manipulate. Also, maybe with the temptation of money, because with all that money, you get that liquidity being pumped into the Vatican Bank,
Oh
and
yeah.
and so that might have been the rationalization that maybe people had within the Vatican. Money always helps, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and
I mean, there are so many
yeah,
players
and
involved.
and that gets to the intrigues or the suspicions that maybe John Paul I was assassinated because he was looking into the Vatican Bank and would have opened up a whole can of worms. But it's not clear exactly. It's just there's some valid theories in that area, I think so.
Right.
But again, that's another example where the church is again working with P2 Lodge, which is a Freemasonic lodge. Of course, the history of the Catholic Church and the Freemasonry is, I think there's more than a dozen encyclicals condemning Freemasonry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's right, and certainly Freemasonry has been the enemy of traditional society as far as throne and altar and traditional communities and identity go. But they've been adept at infiltrating institutions and creating revolutions for centuries. So you have documents like the Alta Vendita saying that they're going to infiltrate the Catholic Church and turn it to their use.
Mm-hmm.
So
now, again, Chris, I think in your article, Malta, Masonry, and CIA.
Yes.
This is a good segue. One of the avenues, one of the vehicles for infiltrating the church, is it the Knights of Malta?
Yeah, the Knights of Malta. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. So here you're getting into the Malta, Masonry, and the CIA. Let's mention that article before we close out the interview tonight.
Sure. Yeah, Malta, Masonry, and the CIA is written by a former KGB colonel, Stanislav Likaryov, who actually served in London as an intelligence officer during the Cold War, and he was an officer in the KGB First Chief Directorate, responsible for foreign intelligence operations, and he was known to be a very wily operative, and was good at giving MI5, British counterintelligence, a slip, and he would later go on to write a column. He died recently, but he post Cold War he wrote a column on espionage and history of secret societies, things like that. And so Likaryov goes into how the Knights of Malta are connected to the Western establishment, as well as intelligence agencies and secret societies like Freemasonry. So you get sort of a seamless garment of various ties through individuals and organizations, how they all overlap. Everyone from Alan Dulles to Reinhard Galen, people like that were Knights of Malta. So, as well as being tied to Freemasonry.
Yeah, I think there's a second paragraph in the article goes in the Masonic intelligence complex.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah, he calls it Likaryov calls it the Masonic intelligence complex because so many, if you look at the history, so many back in the say even the earlier days of the CIA, so many of the leadership of CIA were in fact Freemasons. So that and again that goes back to the question, who's really directing whom? Is the spy agency in charge of the cult, or is the cult in charge of the spy agency?
Well, we definitely know it's not the Senate Intelligence Committee oversight, nor is it the National Security Agency or Council.
Yeah, they do what they're told. Yeah,
but again, if we look at look at these intelligence agencies, whether it's MI6 or CIA or Mossad, is the forces that went into creating these agencies. You have to look at that.
Right.
The interest, whether it's the British East India Company or the Wall Street, these interests, and of course the Wall Street elite date back to the opium trade and the clipper ships in America, and these are the interests that went into creating intelligence agencies to more or less socialize their risks and privatize their profits.
You bet. Yeah, on right. It's all on behalf of international oligarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Is where it goes. Yeah.
But again, I guess in any case, Masonic techniques have been adapted in the CIA, MI6, and BND, that's the German intelligence, and Mossad, with all conditions equal during officer selection preferences given to Freemasons. So there's a high.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah,
and he was a KGB colonel, and he probably came across. I'd imagine that Likaryov came across his stuff in London and knew, so he knew what he was talking about.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, so this, now you have a question of whether Yeltsin was a Mason? Because
Well, the Likaryov poses the question: was Yeltsin a Mason? And there's no evidence of that. What there's a very strange moment in 1991. Yeltsin was made a Knight of Malta, um, and it was really weird because it was some sort of ceremony in the Kremlin, and he was photographed at it. But the person who awarded it was this weird psychic lady. Uh, Her name was Juna Davitashvili, and a Georgian, and she was she was a strange bird, to say the least. But she awarded him the Maltese Cross, and just you would think, okay, that doesn't mean anything. He's not really a Knight of Malta. But a year later, official relations between Russia and the Knights of Malta were restored, and that relationship went back to Emperor Paul the First, who actually was given fealty by the Knights of Malta during it was during Russian activities in the Mediterranean against the Turks, and so that was the late 18th, very very early 19th century before he was assassinated, which was also a Masonic plot, interestingly enough. But um, it's very strange that Yeltsin has, if you look at the article at espionagehistoryarchive.com, yeah, Malta Masonry and the CIA, you can see the picture of Yeltsin with the regalia of the Knights of Malta, and then there is the official restoration of relations with
hmm
them. So um, yeah, and that's also used, of course, as a vehicle of infiltration, and it does ultimately tie into the Masonic lodges, as he notes. Uh, there's a sort of a quote unquote orthodox counterpart to the Knights of Malta, that was, I guess, was founded by an Archbishop Makarios. So, and it was supposedly directed from London and funded by rich Greek Masons in the United States. So,
hmm.
Masonry is antithetical. I mean, it's a religion in itself, and it's antithetical to the Orthodox Church, or the Catholic Church, and so it's neither traditional, an Orthodox person or a Catholic person would, if they're well grounded and their tradition would have anything to do with it. But here you have, again, these different Masonic ties creeping in. So yeah, it really does. I think it ultimately does go back to such organizations. It is a strategy of tension, or a strategy of chaos that is used to destabilize societies and undermine their morale, their culture, their traditional religion, spirituality, and replace it with what can best be called simulacra of that, meaning the sort of the Disneyland style uh, consumer uh, religion of whatever might be promoted at the present moment.
hmm
Yeah.
Now, with you mentioned that you mentioned the destroying of culture and differences, and of course we get that in the religious realm with the ecumenical movement, right?
Yeah, the ecumenical movement is certainly, um, I think that really does point towards the ultimate, sort of the dissolution of true faith in favor of some sort of overlaying one world religion, which is what lots of elite social engineers have talked about, like Aldous Huxley being a prominent example. But and this goes back a long, long way too. If you can look at the first World Parliament of Religions was held in Chicago on September 11th, 1983, or excuse me, September 11th, 1893. And that was sponsored by Freemasons and also by Theosophy, by the Theosophists. So that points to this drive, this syncretistic drive to create this this great one world faith, and which basically means, of course, suffocating the truth and and giving up what's actually important in spirituality. But yeah, and this is something that Rene Guénon spoke of as well. The infiltration of traditional institutions, whether they be, in the Western case, medieval knightly orders like the Templars, or you have the Knights of Malta, who were originally the Knights Hospitaller, but at some point they're turned, or a part of their leadership is turned towards something bad, and it goes from there in a counter traditional direction. And so that same process can happen with major religions as well.
And you could also make the same case with maybe efforts to promoting integration. Was shrouded in a progressive kumbaya, but it was a destabilization program.
Right, and it's bad for everyone. This is meant to destroy everyone's identity.
Mm-hmm.
This is no matter who you are. This is targeted at you, and even if it plays one side against another, and it might uplift seemingly one side and promote the interests of one culture against another. It's ultimately meant to destroy every like you can see right with the situation. Well, I mean, you have certainly recent history, or you can look at Europe, but it's the entire experiment it really is a strategy of tension, and it's meant to grind down all cultures. So you're waging these awful wars in the Middle East. You're sponsoring jihadists. You're displacing entire populations. You're sending them into Europe, where they don't have anything in common with the culture, and then you're expecting that everyone's going to get along.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a recipe for catastrophe.
And they're not that stupid. So there's
it's not that stupid. No. Yeah, I mean, they can mask it with the stupid slogans, and liberal political philosophy in a way is that stupid, but it's something that goes deeper. It's meant to it's really meant to annihilate identity.
Well, look at the melting pot that came out of the I think ADL.
Yeah, that's interesting. The melting pot, right, is another example of sort of this remaking, this, you could almost call it social alchemy.
Or was it B'nai B'rith? I'm not sure.
Oh, I'm not sure.
B'nai B'rith, but B'nai B'rith is sort of like Jewish Freemasonry. So
right, yeah, and that's tied to Coudenhove Kalergi, and the sort of the plan to remake Europe and essentially, deprive the peoples who have always lived in Europe of their identity, and to move in a bunch of people from elsewhere. And again, this is not fair to anyone, and it's really awful and destructive.
It's also horrible social engineering.
Oh yeah. It's warfare.
You're treating human beings like objects, and you're taught you can mix them around, and
right.
It involves all high level malfeasance and coercion, and abuse of power and by
Yeah, it's always based on coercion and lies.
So,
yeah.
But that's again, I think when we get back into originally we talked about CIA and Scientology and these secret societies, particularly Freemasonry, and that's what it's all about. So
yeah, and this stuff is just keeps on rolling. You have a recent example it was from last year was published in The Intercept, where a case in North Korea where this NGO, this supposed Christian NGO called evangelical Christian NGO called Humanitarian International Services Group, based out of Colorado, was actually conducting intelligence operations in North Korea on behalf of the Pentagon, and it was led by or it was initiated by this famous special forces Delta Force guy named Jerry Boykin, who's a big evangelical Christian, and but yeah, and I don't know where there might tie in the more esoteric dimensions or where those might factor in, but still, yeah, it's a constant phenomenon. It doesn't go away, and it fits right in with the use of other non-governmental organizations or other professions as cover, whether it be journalists or businessmen or aid workers. There's no real limit to what you can exploit if you have a completely amoral view of the world and how you want to extract benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. And it also makes all those people legitimate targets then too.
Yeah, everyone's a target
because well, good. I mean, the KAL 007 that went down was shot down back in '83.
Yeah, '83. Yep.
There's some reason to suspect that the airline itself has always been tied to intelligence agencies.
Yeah, Korean Airlines. Yeah, was tied to U.S. intel I think it was the KCIA, Korean intelligence, which if you want a good example of cults or religions operating under intelligence guidance, the Moon Unification Church, the Moonies.
Oh yeah. And that factors into a lot of the Korean money, into a lot of the conservative activists.
Yes, they were very, very active in the conservative movement during the '80s, and they even owned the Washington Times. Yeah, which interestingly enough brought forward the news of the Franklin scandal. But I was kind of wondering, why would a Mooney own paper,
Then it was shut down.
Yeah, that was shut down for a while, but I can't remember who it was sold to, but yeah, it was very strange.
They did the callboy story in the White House.
Yes, exactly, the White House callboy ring
in June of '89, and then there was supposed to be a follow-up investigation. I think it was Paul Rodriguez who was working that story. I think that's the guy. Yeah, and I think they ran it, then they let it go. They shut it down, and because when a story like that opens up so many can of worms. It's not just a sex thing. You're opening up Iran-Contra, the abuse of the savings and loans that these banks are using for money. You realize a lot of the mob and the money were raiding these banks, institutions, to fund all types of operations. And if you do a thorough investigation, you get into everything.
yeah, and that's the same. And really, that's the same kind of stuff that goes on with these religious fronts, like World Vision. Is you are using it for money laundering and for cover for, say, paramilitary operations or drug running or whatever might be the case.
And if you destabilize a country or a region, you can do a lot down there once you destabilize, whether it's running drugs or training terrorists terrorist organizations or death squads, things like that.
Yeah, it's a black hole.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a
in the
great
amount of
arena for the fun and games division of the intelligence agencies. So
yeah.
and it creates business because it creates instability, which justifies the gun running and the drugs,
Right.
and it's just
Right. And ultimately more intervention and more calls for war and we gotta save we gotta democratize this country and bring freedom there, which of course is a boon to the military industrial complex.
Mhm. Just today there were the attacks in Belgium.
Yes.
I'm
Which
immediately thinking Gladio.
if I would highly yes, I would highly recommend to listeners that before they yes, the direct executioners of the attacks do seem to be the Islamic State. But if you
It goes back to NATO.
exactly goes back to NATO. The Islamic State is run from Turkey.
NATO
I mean,
country.
the logistics are black and white. They
Yeah.
point right to it. But if listeners would if they haven't, they should look into the history of Gladio and the fact that various false flag attacks were carried out through the course of the Cold War by right-wing paramilitaries on the orders of NATO intelligence services, and then blamed on the communists or the left or uh, factions like that in order to strengthen the state. That was for example, P2 Lodge, the Masonic lodge, ran Gladio in Italy. So uh, in Belgium, where the attacks happened today, there were various attacks carried out, and there were interestingly there were mass shootings in the
Mhm.
1980s,
Yeah.
which were committed in supermarkets, and lots of innocent people died in those. At least I'm not quite sure if it was in the dozens but it was it was some number of innocents were murdered by these right-wing paramilitaries that were acting on the orders of the intelligence services.
Hmm.
And then of course it was blamed on the left or whoever in order to sort of build that strategy of tension.
Well, even with Bader Meinhof, there's some question about what they
Yeah,
were. I mean,
yeah,
they died in police custody, and
right.
and again, these groups can be manipulated. They can be assets, even.
Oh, yes. I mean, you can look at the example of the Red Brigades in Italy.
Yeah,
The exact same story.
or the people that attacked the World Trade Center in 1993.
Yeah, because
That
right, Ahmed Salam, I
yeah,
think was his name.
yeah.
Yeah, was told to uh, let the have the device be live, essentially.
Hmm.
I think was
Oh yeah, he deliver a live bomb. That's when
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Right, by his FBI
Handle
handlers.
sting
So
operation. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
well,
pretty
listen, Mark, I want to thank you for coming on the show.
yeah.
My voice is going now,
Oh yeah, mine too. That's
so
fine.
that's a good time to cut it off. I think you covered everything I wanted to cover with the two articles you had here. Again, it's Mark Hackard, Soul of the East.
Yeah, souloftheeast.org and espionagehistoryarchive.com.
Okay, great. Yeah, go there with the articles. Lot there to read about and chew on. And good night.
All right. Night, Tim.
Thank you.
Thanks.